Day. Not sure where they're traveling to or if they traveled at all, but they're on vacation. So is Jim and Sandra and Sally and Amelia. They're in Florida having a big time. So I'd appreciate you keep them in your prayers if you would, that they get home safely. Doesn't look like we have any visitors so far. Any prayer requests? Anybody we want to keep in mind in our prayers? David.
My mother-in-law is having a hard time right now. She looks like she's going to have her pacemaker replaced, and she's 91.
I understand. What's her name, David?
Ann Crowell.
All right, David Irvin's mother-in-law, Ann Crowell, 91, having a pacemaker replaced soon. So that's understandably somewhat worrisome. Anybody else we want to specifically keep in mind? Greg?
Sandra Arndt has tested positive for COVID. She has some family members also, and then Veronica is still quarantining.
She didn't test positive. She was just she was exposed, right?
So she's waiting on getting clearance test.
Right. So Veronica Calvin is still under quarantine. She was exposed. It doesn't look like she's tested positive yet, but Greg mentioned Sandra Arndt has tested positive for COVID. So please let's keep her in mind. Lee. Yeah. It's Will Stevens, 10-year-old boy, a friend of Lee's son, dealing with cancer again multiple times. So Will Stevens, if we could keep him in mind and keep all these folks in mind too at home, and keep your bulletin handy with the people we have on our sick list, and keep that on your kitchen table and keep those people in mind along with all the other works that we're involved in. Anybody else before we pray? Okay. I've always wanted to do this. Philip, would you mind leading us in prayer before we start?
Pray together. Most righteous Father, as we come before thee at this time, we're so thankful we've got this time set aside so that we can study a portion of thy word. We're thankful, Heavenly Father, for Scott, who's with us to teach the class, and pray for him. We also pray for Bruce and Christy and Nathan as they travel. We pray for their safety and the safe return. Heavenly Father, we're especially mindful at this time of those
Philip. Sorry for bumping the microphone. Not used to this. Lower it down a little bit so I don't breathe too heavy. The first thing I want to mention isn't even related to the class topic, but I just came across it last night, and I thought it was such an interesting point. I read a lot lately about the best ways to discipline your little baby. You know, Amelia's getting to an age where we're going to have plans in place on how to discipline. And I got this book. Sally gave me this book a while back from, I love history, and this is probably, definitely one of the most influential people in the state of Tennessee, not just the church, but in the whole history of the state. And that's Marshall Keeble, his book, From Mule Back to Superjet with the Gospel. This is in the 1960s. He's saying everything in the modern home is run by a switch except the children. And I just thought that was a funny point, the inference being turn on the light with the switch, turn on the heat with a switch, but you're not using a switch with your baby. And I thought that might be fairly wise, and being in the 1960s, that could be part of the reason for the shape we're in. So but I've already, even before I read it, I've taken that to heart. And when Amelia is acting up, I go straight up to her and I say, if you do this one more time, I'm taking you straight to mama for a whipping. Anyway, I want to have a lesson about our speech. I had this book right here. It's a annual lesson commentary on Bible school lessons for Churches of Christ, published annually by the Gospel Advocate. And this came from A.C. Ivy's library. My brother got it for me when A.C. Ivy passed. I looked up the other night just to see when that was because I couldn't remember exactly. It was 2007. We're loosely related to A.C. Ivy through marriage. Our cousin married his daughter Sharon, and I've been interested in his life too. And I read that in his obituary also. He was a captain in the Marines in World War II and Korea. It was at Iwo Jima and a battle in Korea, the Chosin Reservoir. And if you were to add Valley Forge in that list from the Revolutionary War, I don't think there's three worse places that if you were American man-at-arms that you could find yourself at. Just three of the worst situations with weather, with just the whole thing combined. So he obviously led a very interesting life. And another thing I noticed when I was looking at this book, it reminded me of books from my own books that I had at my mother's house, because I opened this book and there's a certain smell, so I can tell that it's the smell of what his house smelled like all these years later, because I had these books on my own shelf, and I open my own books now, and I can smell my mother's house from decades ago, and it just, it brings back a certain feeling of nostalgia. So in this particular lesson, I went to this because I was looking in the table of contents, and I thought, well, maybe I could get a lesson out of this book. And there's a certain segment of lessons for every quarter, and I saw winter quarters, and I looked at it wrong. I thought winter quarters, and I'm thinking, that's interesting, where Christians should live in the winter. And then a few seconds later, it dawned on me how dumb I am, because it's talking about the winter quarter, summer quarter, spring quarter. But anyway, so this is why I went to the winter quarter, and there's a lesson in here about speech of Christians a lesson outline that I found interesting and needful. And there was also a lesson about partaking of the Lord's Supper. Bruce happened to preach a good sermon on that the other day, so I thought I would pass on that. There's a memory verse in this, Proverbs 15:1, which I've been working on memorizing, and I'm still going to read it just in case I forget. But Proverbs 15:1 says, "A soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger." And when we think of Proverbs, I'm sure you all know this. You might not think of it as might think of it as a principle, so to speak, not necessarily, I guess, what you might call a universal truth, because a soft answer should turneth away wrath. That's the result we should get with a soft answer. But Jesus gave soft answers. Jesus said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And he was crucified. So when you're dealing with humans, we have the ability to respond however we choose. So in these Proverbs, it's not always, you're not always going to get that result, but it's a guiding principle. And on that note, too, I just read something that I thought was a point that I haven't thought about in a long time. Even when Jesus was crucified, the very people that crucified him, those same people throughout the whole course of human history, those were the people that had the first chance to hear the gospel of Christ preached. And I thought that was an interesting point to think about on how we should conduct ourselves like Jesus as far as giving a soft answer and being forgiving of our fellow men. Our text is going to be from the book of James, chapter 3, verses 1 through 14. James chapter 3, 1 through 14. Another preacher I listen to a lot, Johnny Ramsey, says you would do well in life if you read the book of James every morning and every night you read the book of Psalms. That seems like wise counsel for the subject matter. And so this particular set of verses I'm actually going to read this from the New King James. James chapter 3, we'll read 1 through 14, and then we'll go back and discuss it. And I certainly, I don't know, I haven't given a lesson in a while, so I don't know how long my material is going to last or not last. I might have enough for 3 lessons, or we might make it till 9:25. But if you have any input or questions, I would really, really appreciate it. All right, James chapter 3, 1 through 14. Let me get a sip of water first. My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles? And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus, no spring yields both salt water and fresh. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. All right? So, if we go back and look at verse 1 there, at a glance, it would seem like it might be somewhat discouraging people from teaching. And we know that the opposite is true, that we are supposed to become teachers. Hebrews 5:12, I'll go ahead and flip over there and read that real quick. For when for the time ye ought to be teachers, ye have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and to become such as have need of milk and not of strong meat. So the normal cycle is to receive instruction so that one day you'll be able to teach. And here in Hebrews, we see the writer rebuke people that weren't preparing themselves to teach, and that should be taken very seriously. But at this time in history, in Jewish history, there seemed to be a lot of people that wanted the title of rabbi or teacher. So a lot of Jewish folks wanted to be a rabbi that weren't qualified. So they were seeking that office because they felt it was a place of honor, and that kind of attitude seemed to make its way into the early church. We can look at 1 Timothy 1:7 related to that. 1 Timothy 1, verse 7 says, desiring to be teachers of the law, understanding neither what they say nor whereof they affirm. So that's the context of what we're looking at here. And also, it's interesting to keep in mind that this brief statement about teaching comes right before a lesson on the tongue, the evils of it and the good parts of it. We know that to teach, you have to use the tongue, and we need to be aware that we are going to give account for everything we say, everything we teach. We need to make very clear that we're avoiding error and be responsible for what we're saying and teaching. Verse 2, back in our text in James. Let me flip back there. I need some more markers on my Bible. The tendency to stumble is a characteristic in all of us. But with teachers, you don't just have the responsibility of your own life and stumbling in your own life. You've got responsibility for other people. So your responsibility is so much the more. And the way this phrases that if you can avoid erring with the tongue, it's if anyone does not stumble in word, he's a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. So if we're able to control our tongue, we may have strength to keep our whole body in check, keep our whole body in subjection. But it's that difficult of a job. Verse 3 and 4, you see some illustrations with the bits in horse's mouth and the rudder of a ship. The rudder of a ship is very small, but it controls a whole giant ship. I think of this book. Philip always liked this book, so I read it. Piloting the Strait. You've got these big cliffs and a little bitty waterway, and this little bitty rudder can control a big ship right where it needs to go. And the analogy here is the same as true with our speech. If we can keep that under control, it can guide us right in the direction that we need to go, and we can avoid these rocky cliffs and all these problems we can come into in our life that we'll see some further here in our lesson. And so I think when we go to talk, we need to think every time. I mean, is what I'm saying, is it needed? Is it going to edify? Is it going to build people up? What's the purpose? What's the real purpose of what I'm going to say? And was thinking of something I read in another book. Old football coach at Memphis State had a little book, and he said, it's probably not even original, but he said, if you'll wake up in the morning and if you will smile until 10 in the morning, if you will just concentrate on keeping a smile on your face until 10 in the morning, you'll be surprised how great your day is going. And I think that is great advice, especially from 1 Thessalonians 5, when which if we get through this lesson, we'll probably go through that. It says a very blunt statement. It says, rejoice evermore. So, I mean, we are supposed to be happy people. But the same goes for our speech. If we wake up every morning and smile until 10 a.m., I think we'll notice our day is going great. And the same, if we will wake up and be aware, be cognizant of what we use our words for, I think we'll be surprised how great our day is going. Verse 5. Let me get back to the New King James Version of this. Tongue's a little member, boasts great things. Verse 6, we see another analogy of a fire. A world of iniquity and flames with the fire of hell. And think back of your own life. I mean, and who can even measure the evil that we may have caused through things we can do with our speech? Slandering other people, profaneness, falsehood, blasphemy, obscenity, and error. Think about friends and family that we may have alienated through that way, or it's a natural thing too, and I say this especially me with this lesson. I list off all those things. My first thoughts go to people. They don't go to myself. They go to other people I know that have slandered me and have said things that have caused strife. And we need to take the time not to think about other people first in that way. We need to think about ourselves. I'll get to another point here too when maybe we have some discussion, but I think about even in ways that I'm right. I've had an inclination over my own life. When I'm in the right, I'm not trying to speak in a loving way necessarily. I'm trying to win an argument. Even if I am right, that's not the way to approach it. I think of even just recently, I just hate to give too much personal experience, but another congregation in town that I know was practicing error. I've got family members that attend there. It's even a congregation with a special place in my heart because my mother was baptized at that congregation on Christmas Eve, 1944. So I'm fond of it, and I see error being practiced, and I want to say something, but I can tell that my instinct is not necessarily because I want to reproach or I want to, let me rephrase, I want to say something in a loving way in hopes that they'll correct their behavior. I'm wanting to say, hey, I'm right here. Y'all are wrong, and I have to be aware of that and cognizant and check my behavior and the real reasons of why I want to say something in the first place. Paulette?
Colossians 4:6, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each other. And I think that's really helpful. But then looking at how Paul addressed the people at Areopagus, which was a place to argue. And he was so, in my term, would be diplomatic.
Right.
And I think, the way that he approached that, it is a place to argue. People were
Exactly. That's a very good biblical example of the way we should guide our speech and the way that we should approach people, even those in the church that we think are in the midst of error, and not necessarily in a way that we're trying to show ourselves as better. But that's very, very well-placed point, Paulette. Tanya.
I'm going to bring you back to full circle where you started with disciplining
Mm-hmm.
children. And I found through years and years of experience that if perhaps my children didn't talk as kindly as I wanted them to, then I had to examine myself. Because they are really sponges and they're going to do everything we do. So if I felt like I had to be right, and to take your example, or if I felt like I had to win an argument, then I had these little children that were patterns of what I was, and they would talk to me the same way they heard me talk to their dad or to someone.
Exactly.
And so that's part of the battle is for me to show them through my speech how I wanted them to carry themselves. And so that was always a reminder. I always picked up on that, and I would hear that in my children.
I think that's an excellent point, and I'll take that even further. Even inside the home, I've got to be guarded about how I speak to my wife, Sally. Like, I don't need to give myself an out, so to speak. Oh, it's not really a gossiping, or I'm really not talking negative, because I'm just discussing things with my wife, and nobody else is going to hear it. But if you start doing that, it's just like kids hearing maybe the way you talk to somebody not in the right way. If you start doing that just with your wife and you start saying, well, this is okay, the next thing you know, that's going to bleed right into, that's going to be in your mindset, that's the way you can conduct yourself. And so then the next time you have opportunity, you're going to take that and run with it, so to speak. Maybe not run with it, but you might find yourself saying something to somebody about somebody else or whatever, something that shouldn't have been said. And once you do that, you can't get it back. Paulette?
I was raised, my mother was one that chased you around with switch. My dad was one of the most diplomatic people I've ever been around, and that's what influenced me more than anything. He was so diplomatic, he was never confrontational. He was very tolerant. He was very successful in his business, but it was because he was so fair and so diplomatic, and whatever he said was so well received.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a wonderful example to
It
your child.
It is. And just like you say, being diplomatic, how you say, I'm going to skip ahead just in case we run out of time to this poem I found. I have a lot of stuff like this on my bookshelf, but I don't ever read it until the occasion comes. But this is a 12th century poem, Persian poem, translated by an English guy, Edward Fitzgerald, in the 1700s. And it just, when Paulette talked about being diplomatic in a way, if you're not, unfortunately, there's just sometimes there's no way to get it back. Listen to this poem. It says, "The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on, nor all your piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all your tears wash out a word of it." So, really have to keep in mind our speech, and like I mentioned earlier, what's the purpose when we're going to say something? Another preacher I heard use the phrase "shut your trap." He said it's an ancient phrase. Actually, it sounds like something from 20 years ago, but just an analogy of the tongue being a wild beast, and your mouth and your teeth are the trap. That's the only way you're going to trap that wild beast, and there's times we need to do that. Verses 7-8 in our text here, we see an analogy just like we were talking about of for every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but our tongue can't be tamed. So that's not saying that we can't have control of it. What that's saying is, I'll give you an example of my dog. My dog at home. You can come into my house and my dog can run around loose because my dog is tamed. My dog is not going to hurt anybody. So you can sit there and not be worried about anything happening. But for the rest of your life, I don't care how long you guard your tongue, how long you keep it in check, for the rest of your life, your tongue is not going to be tamed. You're going to have to keep it under guard 7 days a week, 365. Philip likes to use the term 168 hours a week. That's one of his favorite terms. We've all got 168 hours a week to do stuff. So, point being, no matter how long we go keeping our tongue in check, it's still not tamed. We still have to keep guard on it forever, as long as we live in this earthly body. I'm going to read another writing from truly one of my childhood heroes. I watched him every day, 1975 and 1976. I guarantee you I watched him every weekday, maybe partially because there was nothing else to do, but I watched Mr. Rogers every day. And I can't think of him ever saying anything that was out of line or wasn't positive. But Mr. Rogers says, if you could only sense how important you are to the lives of those you meet, how important you can be to people you may never dream of, there's something of yourself that you leave at every meeting with another person. So, again, I hate to use too much personal experience, but I'm sure everybody has a memory like this. I remember being in 8th grade. I was a mess. I was getting chased at the bus stop by neighborhood kids, you might say hoodlums. Pre-algebra, looked like something from NASA to me. I'm in a constant state of worry and fear. And every day I walked in the lunchroom, there was this kid in the 12th grade. For whatever reason, he would just say, "How's it going?" Just about every day. And just the little bitty greeting he gave me boosted me up and made me feel so much better. And I almost think some days it got me over the hump. And he didn't know me from Adam. I hear that term, I don't know why I think it's funny, but I think Adam's house cat. You didn't know me from Adam's house cat. You hear that, I think it's funny, and It's a Wonderful Life. I don't even know why this, but Nick said he didn't know me from Adam's ox, but I always thought that was a funny term also. But anyway, we don't know how we might be able to build somebody up, just with a little greeting. Proverbs 25:11, flip back over there if you don't mind. It's about things positive with the tongue. Proverbs 25:11, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver. So, don't be shy. Greet people and, say hi. Just have an open countenance. I didn't used to be that way, and it's still a great challenge. I'm probably not now most of the time, frankly, because I'm probably shy. But I try to have an open, just let people know I care about them. And that's all people. Verses 9 through 12. Well, one more thing. Let me go back to Well, we'll come back to that if we have time. Verse 9 through 12, we see the inconsistency of the tongue. We have, with it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Something else to keep in mind, I don't even know if that's directly related to our speech, but it's easy to think, come here every Sunday, and it's easy to think of the church as, a bunch of middle-class people from the Mid-South. It's easy to just have that in your mindset. And people all over the world, even people that we just think are horrible, we have to remember those people are still made in the image of God. And we need to think of how we talk about people. When you put it in that context of how I'm talking about somebody, anybody in the history of humanity, they're still made in the image of God. And I think that might put yourself in a little bit of check when you start thinking about saying something bad about anybody. So we see some comparisons or contrasts rather here to things in nature. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. In verse 10, wow. Anyway, verse 9, what we talked about cursing men, verse 10 says this shouldn't be so. Let's move on to verse 13 and 14, which is about wisdom and the importance of wisdom. And we're going to see we should pray for wisdom. Verse 13 says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that as his works are done in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth." Back in James 1:5, it says that we should pray for wisdom. And some people will pray for faith, which isn't really a biblical pattern. We see faith is gained. Romans 10:17, we see Romans 10:17, we see how faith is gained. So faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. But we're told to pray for wisdom. Verse 17 says, "But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace." David?
I've been struggling with this for 2 years now, but we have, I've quit watching the news because I have no control over my tongue when I watch the news.
Mm-hmm.
But we live in a society now that tempts the tongue, that even though it's hard enough to control it as it is, but it can't be controlled. How is it that we answer people who are teaching children that they can choose what sex they want to be? That's not okay in a work environment, and yet they can bring sex into a childhood environment.
That's a good point.
It disgusts me so bad.
Nobody, and that's a error, as we know. But there are things we spend our time on. This earlier verse 15 is another contrast. We see heavenly wisdom with earthly wisdom, where it says, "For where envying and strife is, there's confusion and every evil work." Rather 15, "This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish." And this word sensual, you might contrast with heavenly wisdom, which is spiritual. And just one other point, the second bell's about to ring, and I'm nowhere near finished or gathering up, but I was noticing the word spirit versus the word soul. And if you look at all of those words all throughout the Bible, you'll see that spirit is a greater term. It's a higher term. And anyway, we see another contrast here with sensual versus spiritual, and I'll have to save the rest for next time. And I sure appreciate all of your attention and comments.